Hey everybody, it's Joan here and I'm here with Pam Pranger and we are doing a very special training for you today on funding. I know that you agreed to be part of the International Climate Action Challenge and we're saying, all right, you could get something going and you definitely can. But a natural progression is that once you are able to start getting people together, start making an impact, the next question is, wow, if we had more money, what more could we do? And how would we go about doing that? And so I've invited Pam to join us today to talk through some of those questions. So I think this is something we've been getting a lot of questions about. So I'm really happy that Pam has had time to join us. So first, I want to just start by saying hello, Pam, and thanks for hopping in today.
Very happy to do so.
Awesome. So I was going to give kind of a quick intro, but you could fill it in a little bit more. But Pam joined us. She just kind of stumbled upon us, as you do sometimes on the internet. One of the days we were doing our kickoff event, and she was in some of our happy hour sessions and was saying, oh yeah, I'm on a review board for a foundation. I review grants. And my ears perked up immediately of, okay, here's someone who actually knows what funders are looking for. And the rest of us are just making it up as we go along. I know when I started Sustainable Revolution Longmont, I'd never written a grant. We winged it totally. We didn't know what we were doing. And just so you know, folks out there, that's how a lot of people do it, and you can figure it out that way. But also, we want to be more effective and make a big impact fast. That's what we're all about. So let's learn from somebody who knows it from the inside. So Pam has been a business consultant, helped a lot of nonprofit, small businesses, does a lot of things around environmental and climate action stuff in her city in Huntington, Indiana, and is a mentor with the 2020 International Climate Action Challenge. So is there anything else that you wanted to say, Pam? I'd be really curious to know, how did you get into this? How did you get into this area?
Oh, that's a whole different story.
Okay.
I had been in the business world, and I needed a break. So I ended up doing a retreat with a religious order. And while I was there, they said, oh, can you come help us with our computers? And so I ended up doing their finances and computer work for them. But as a process of doing that, as I was saying, in the business world, I had reviewed proposals and did problem solving. So they quite often would ask me to interact with the small projects and non-for-profits that they were working with. So as time went on and they formed a foundation, they asked me to be on the board of the foundation, to both be on the board and review the grants that were coming in, review the request. So I was doing things both from the standpoint of the many, many different projects that they were involved with, and they would come and ask me if I could help them from the business side.
Right.
And so from that, in my free time, when I wasn't working, I would go out within the community and work with other organizations, such as Habitat for Humanity and the Women's Shelter, our food bank, and our senior center, as well as a health clinic, that were again asking from the business side, what are the things we need to know? And we're collecting money from people, and are we doing it the right way? And we're writing a budget, but we're not sure how we should do it. So I learned more and more. But then once I started reviewing the grants that are coming in, then I was seeing it from a different perspective, from the aspect of, what is it about this project that could cause it to fail? And what are the things that, if they just knew this little thing, would make such a huge, huge difference?
Yeah.
And so that's why I do this type of thing.
Well, that's perfect. And that's why I think I forgot to say that, but that's the name of our training is What Funders Wished You Knew. And so this is really neat. And that's kind of cool to hear that your background, so you've seen it from all different directions. And, you know, as Pam and I were preparing for this training, we thought that there's lots of folks who need this kind of fundraising advice, but in particular, we have a lot of groups in the challenge who are small groups of people who are doing things literally on the ground and in the ground, with doing community gardens kinds of projects, and tree planting projects, and starting tree seedlings, and really those grassroots groups. And so we wanted to, you know, some of the larger groups or folks, you know, if you're part of a school or a faith organization that already has some things going, you might have other resources. But if you're just starting something, it's just a group of you, this training could be really helpful to just give you the basics. I know all those things you said you did, I've done none of them as far as working on any kind of the admin of a nonprofit, or really knowing how those things work. So, so with that, I think we're ready to get going. And so yeah, I'll just kind of turn it over to you. And what are those kind of main things that you feel like people should know if they are approaching a foundation or some kind of organization that has grants?
Okay, I would say, first of all, they definitely want to sit down and play around with the budget. And in doing the budget, they would want to list everything that they're going to have to go to the store and spend money on. Anything for which there would be a bill, list all those things off. Initially, as they're working on their budget, don't even worry about whether you're getting absolutely every single thing. But if you're doing, for example, a community garden, you need to buy seeds, you need to have shovels, you need to do some, for example, maybe postcards that you're going to be printing flyers on. That's an expense, getting those flyers printed. But you want to list absolutely everything that you can think of. You also want to talk with other groups that are doing something similar and ask them, oh, did I forget anything? You want to slice your budget from different directions. So for example, if you're doing a tree planting, you might say, what is the total cost for each tree? And in there, you're including so much went into advertising, or so much went into, you know, the materials that you needed, so that if you said to a funder, it costs me this much per tree. But you also want to know that it was this much for the seeds and this much for the shovels and etc. Baskets.
So you're saying if somebody says, okay, our project is plant 1,000 trees, then what all is it going to take? And to really spend that extra time trying to make sure you haven't missed anything, talk to people who've already done it, who can tell you, wait, you're going to need this, that, and the other. So make sure you're going to have to, they give you those seedlings for free, but you have to pay for transportation or something that you might not.
Transportation, buckets, water.
Right. Yeah, maybe someone to take care of the trees or check on them or something.
Right. Soaker hoses if you're needing it. And the reason I say you want to mention all those things is because that's the next thing. Now we'll talk about when you go and you ask for money. Mm-hmm. If you're going to a foundation, the number one thing I always say I want people to know is that a foundation is like doing a will. Whatever the person who originally created the foundation did, they made a list of rules so that when they're not there, the people handling the money know what they're allowed to fund and what they're not allowed to fund. So for example, if you said in your list of things, that you're doing this community garden so that you can give food away to people that are hungry. And if this is a foundation that says we are doing food for people, then they may look at your grant proposal and they might be willing to fund it, even though it's not a food giveaway, it does feed people. If, however, the foundation rules say you are not allowed to give food away to people, however, you are allowed to teach skills. So if you're doing a community garden where part of your goal, not made up goal because you want to fill out the paperwork, but real goal is to teach skills in the community of how for people to have their own gardens, that's a skill. Now you fit. So it's very important that people understand that a foundation cannot simply say, oh, this sounds like such a wonderful project, I'll give it money. It has to fit what the paperwork, what it was set up to do.
And what we're using the example of a will as, right, if somebody says, okay, in my will, give money to, you know, this brother and this sister, but not that brother, they can't, whoever's administrating the will can't just say, oh, well, we'll just give it equally, because it's a legal directive that must be followed. And so if they say we'll pay for materials but not wages,
salary,
then to be aware of that. And so
that's a very big point, Joan, because many of them will specifically say you cannot pay for wages, or they may say you cannot buy a building, or they might, those things are quite often excluded from what they're allowed to pay.
Gotcha. And so I think what I'm hearing is that if I'm somebody that's writing a grant, I want to have, I think most people, when they think about writing a grant proposal, they think that it's a lot of time gathering the details and writing it up. What you're saying is there needs to be a lot of time in the beginning with multiple people looking at it and cross-checking. You could probably even call the people, the grant, if there's anything you're not clear about, get 100% clear that it's a good match before you start writing anything.
Correct. Other than the budget. Your budget is important, because then when you call and you ask them, you can zoom in on what they fund and what they don't fund. So, for example, if the foundation location is another one that's very important. Almost every foundation will say whether it must be in the United States, or it might even say it must be in Indiana, or it might say it must be in a poor neighborhood that's underserved. Well, again, your location might not be in the area, but the people you're serving are. Those are the kind of things you'll need to make very clear.
I see. Right.
Okay.
So you have to understand if it's where your group is physically located or where your project is, and it may allow or disallow it based on that.
Correct. And the realization is that virtually every single request for money that comes into a foundation is a good project for that community. It's very much needed, etc. And it breaks our heart that we have to say no, but we have to follow that those rules.
Right.
Okay. Now another thing that is for, and the foundations will tell you what those are, what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. Now, and usually you can, if they have a website, it will list those. Okay. Now, another thing that people need to understand is a foundation is not allowed to pay for debt normally. And it'll say right in there, we do not pay for debt. Well, what's a debt? Well, if you go out and you do a tree planting, you incur all these expenses, and then when the project's all done, you decide, okay, I'm going to write a grant and see if they'll pay me for all those expenses that I didn't know I was going to have, or wages for all the people who planted it. That's after the fact. Now it's a debt. And this is very true. Your groups aren't into buildings yet, but it's surprising how many people tell me, well, we went out, we found this building, we're planning on buying it, and then we want to write a lot of grants to pay for the building after they've already got a mortgage. Well, that's a debt.
Oh, wow. So even for a building, interesting.
Oh, yeah, you want to be looking at those before you get it. Okay, so let's move on to a few of the other kind of things. When you're...
Could I ask you a quick question before we move ahead with that? I feel like there's kind of a spot in between, which is, and in the book, and I know we're kind of thinking about things that follow along with what's recommended in the book and in the process, the Climate Action Challenge book. And I think this still makes sense, though, that idea that if you're somebody that wants to plant 10,000 trees, that still starting with a pilot project that you're probably just going to fund it yourselves. And, you know, maybe you go and find a friend or somebody that's a teacher at a school that has a spot and you're able to maybe plant 10 trees. That it's pretty likely that first thing that you do is just going to be self-funded, you know, that, and from that reputation and with that established credibility, that's what you helps give you some credence when you submit the grant. So the difference is don't plant the 10,000 trees then write a grant, but do a small project to show that you're serious, that you got some momentum going, you figured out what you didn't know, and then write the grant, and then do your big project. Does that kind of seem right?
Okay, I'll put it this way. There's very small, tiny little projects that you can afford to do out of your own pocket, or some friends helped you with, or maybe you went, then I'll kind of expand it a little bit more. And let's say you worked with your local Boy Scout group, or you have some of your friends that are in a particular group and they want to kind of get together with a little bit of supervision / help. But pretty much you can just do it without even opening the door. You said to all your friends, oh, I need a shovel, I need a wheelbarrow, and I need two pots. But now you're ready, and those are very good to do because you're learning a lot of things like the vocabulary, and you're finding out what you're going to have to spend money on if you got into something bigger. Right. Okay, so now we're at the next size bigger, and those are pilots. And I have to tell you, foundations love pilots. Cool. And the term is proof of concept. You're proving that the concept or that the idea will work or won't work. And you're figuring it all out. And so it's very important that you keep a lot of notes about what you learned and what you found out you have to adjust and do differently. You also, when you're in that pilot, trying it out, that next slightly larger, keep track of how many people volunteered, how many hours were volunteered, and how much money people donated and to help you. But even more important, keep a list of everything they brought you. If they brought you 5 shovels, you want to jot those things down. And if you're the person organizing this, do not try to do it all by yourself. Designate a person in your group who's going to keep the list. And here's why. When you actually sit down to write a grant, now you are able, many of the foundations will say, well, how many people helped you with that last project? How much stuff was was donated and what was it? They want to get a feel for how much community participation that you had.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you write in the grant and you're like, well, I don't know what all that was. And so those are things that you kind of want to keep track of.
Right.
The other aspect in even your tiny little project and your middle project, and even when you get really big and you have an organization and a building and 3 locations, you always want to have what I call like a whiteboard or a posting on your Facebook that says, here's the 5, 10 things that we're looking for. Because I can't go out and try to shovel and pick beans in the community garden. My back won't handle it. But if you put on there that you need 5 3-ring binders, hey, I've got that in my back room. I can bring it on down and help out. But then when you go to do the budget, one of the things you learn is we found out from doing this that every year we need some 3-ring binders. And you won't forget that you needed it, but the total cost of planting a tree includes those binders, even though somebody donated it to you.
Gotcha. So those, keeping track of your in-kind contributions. Yeah.
Keeping track so that if you're asked for that information, you have it.
Right.
Because
and I was going to say, I think too, that when you are starting as a small group, that's been my experience. That's all you have is, that, well, this printer donated printing and the city, they donated making copies and they made the banner, and then this business donated prizes. And when you add those all up, you do look like a community organization, because you're saying, oh, the local school, they let us whatever, we worked with all these things. So when you put that picture together, you're showing that the community really values the thing that you're proposing. It's not just you're on your own inventing ideas.
Right. And then from a business standpoint, it helps you to show that you're learning and you're organized, etc.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, cool. All right.
If we go back to the things that we as a foundation, or the foundations I've found, would like you to know, is take a look at what they specifically fund and make sure that what you apply for is what they fund. So let's say you write a grant you're asking for $10,000. And in the grant, the thing that you are looking at your budget and you say, what I need the most is salaries. So I'm going to send out grants to 10 different places, and I'm going to ask all of them for salaries. And it turns out that organization specifically said they will not pay for salaries. They would pay for materials. And in your grant, you have $10,000 for salaries and $2,000 for materials. But they can see from looking at your budget that you also needed to pay for a telephone, you needed transportation, you needed different items. You didn't ask for that. You asked for salaries. So now they cannot give you that money. They can only give you the $2,000 that you asked that fit, and the other amount they can't give you. And I tell you, it breaks my heart every time. It truly breaks my heart. I say, if they had only read what we fund and asked us for what we fund, and not for what we said we can't fund that. And when we go back and ask them off to the side, why did you do that? Well, that's what we needed, and surely you would have given it to us anyway, because it's such a good project. No, we cannot. We cannot. Some organizations will just throw the whole grant out because they can't do it, and others will say, you know what, we'll pay this little piece.
I feel like people need an analogy. I'm not sure if this is the right one, but it's like you're going to a Mexican restaurant and you're ordering lasagna or something, you know, and it's like, well, we can't, you're hungry. We can't give you that thing because we don't have it. But if you would have just asked for lunch, we could have given you lunch. But it,
Yes.
you know, being very cognizant that every single foundation, every single grant has its own details, and spend that extra time, figure it out.
Right.
Or you're
It's
just
unique.
wasting your time. Okay.
Yeah. Another one is verbiage. For example, counseling is a word that is used a great deal right now. And what they're doing in some cases, organization, when they say we're counseling, what they really mean is we are working with the homeless, and so we're counseling them on how to go and find a shelter, or how to get a job. We're teaching them life skills. But in the grant, they write, we're counseling, and we've hired a psychiatrist to actually run the program. And they hired a psychiatrist because they could find one. And since they're working with an at-risk community, it makes sense to have someone with that background. But they're not doing clinical counseling.
Mm-hmm.
But because they called it counseling, now we can't, a group might say that's healthcare, and maybe they're not allowed to do that. So how you ask,
If the funders are more on social issues, then put it in that terms. If it's a clinical setting, then
healthcare,
so make sure that you're using the correct terminology for the lens that
correct,
is being
correct,
tested.
correct. So in our case, the young people that you and I are working with here on your challenge, you're looking at environmental. You are trying to make an environmental impact.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important when it says, what is your project? What are you doing? That you do not say, oh, I'm going to fix climate change. I'm going to solve the pollution in the water problem. Well, you don't go to the store and purchase pollution out of the water. So that's why I'm saying, if you're being vague about what it is you're actually doing, then that makes it very hard for the funders to fund you, because they don't know what you're actually spending the money on.
Right. I saw your other example was, don't say we're fixing poverty. Give, which sounds like a great thing, but no, we have this specific program. We're going to have people doing this, and we need these materials, and this is our timeline, and all that. That
Correct.
level of detail. Yeah, that just when you think about it, the bigger thing, it does bring up so many questions and so much angst.
Yes.
And having a really clear, smaller defined program then gives you something you can see if you understand it or not.
Yes. So I'll use another example. If almost every foundation or funding agency will give the geographical area that they are allowed to fund within. So if it says they can only fund in Florida, USA, and you are out of the United States, funding that's not going to work. If, however, it is an organization that does fund out of the United States, that organization normally will not simply send a check to some other country. They want to work with a local organization that they have some relationship with, so that they know that the money actually will get there, for one, and two, that it's going to be used for what you're saying, because they can't see all the way across the country,
right?
the world.
Okay.
So if you're working with a funding organization that is not in your country, You want to find an organization that is in your country that would be large enough that they can help you through the process and kind of look out for you. So that's in your book, you talked about the fiscal agent.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same type of concept as a fiscal agent. So we, in one of the organizations that I was with, we did fund outside of the country, but we would always contact some organization that we knew that was in the country and said, do you know anything about this group?
Right.
And they would say, oh, we ourselves don't, but that's in such and such a city or town, and we know of an organization that's there. We'll find out for you. So foundations always check. Even in the United States, we always check who is this group.
Right.
So
right.
finding a local organization that you can learn from and ask them to help mentor you is a good thing to do as you grow into those large, start getting
Right.
a little bigger. But don't be afraid. Do not be afraid to say that you're small and you're trying. When you're small and you're trying, we know you're going to make mistakes. We know that you're learning. We know that you're figuring it out. We absolutely love it when you send in your progress reports and you're saying, we learned this, or we found this out, and now we're going to go and do a second pilot, and we're going to use these things we learned, and we want to try this.
Right.
So again, those are good things.
I mean, I think a lot of this really comes back to just really good, clean, clear communication.
Yes.
And I saw a report come in to me that said, we've been in existence for 4 years. And I said, I thought you just started. And they said, well, we did, but we thought it sounded better. And it's like, yeah, you can't do that. And so, I think those things that, and I think it's this thing like we think, oh, well, I'm new, I don't know anything, but that's the way everybody starts. And being upfront about it, and being really clear and showing that you have those community partners, that people care about it. It doesn't have to all be a big dollar amount, or a big number. It's just kind of that sincerity. I think that really comes through.
That sincerity. The foundations are looking for a relationship, not for a one-time, oh, let's just send money out. No, we do not do that. We want a relationship. And you'll find on many of them that will say, we do not fund for more than 3 times. They know you're starting,
Sure.
you're getting going, etc. They also do not want to be the only funder. So you might have another group that says they're going to matching money.
Right.
is always nice. They love it when they're saying we're doing this in collaboration with another group. Those things help because it also says there's other people involved that are kind of helping you out with how you're doing it.
Right. Well,
I tell organizations.
I was just going to say, this is kind of neat because I think what a lot of people that are doing these projects are realizing, people need to be in relationship with nature. And that
Yes.
part of the problem with the environmental movement had been, okay, we have a campaign, we need you to sign this petition or, make this phone call. And the problem with that was there was no relationship, there was no empowerment, there wasn't the creativity. And so that's what these projects are doing, is giving people that relationship. So too with nature and with each other. So too, I think that's a really good paradigm to share, that these foundations would like to be in relationship with you as well. Not that they're necessarily going to be your one and only funder forever, but during the time you're working together, if it's a 1-year reporting period, they want to know what's going on and they want to be in that relationship. So that's a good tip.
Another tip I would give is don't feel like you're out there alone and by yourself. Especially the tree planting and the
Mhm.
community gardens,
Right.
virtually every city and every county in the United States, anyway, is working on trying to get trees planted, but they don't have necessarily the manpower or the people who want to undertake the project. So they're looking for you. So part of that is going to where you think might be the right person and say, I think you're the right person for me to talk to, but we are interested in doing tree planting. Who's looking for us? Who's interested in getting them planted? And can you introduce me or give me their phone number or tell them that I'm coming? Because they are looking for you and don't know that you're out there. So
Yeah.
you can find, I have learned to trust in God that for people who are wanting to do things, there's other people out there that are looking for you, and spend a little time trying to find. The other thing is, don't be afraid that everybody's going to want to do your same project. It turns out the chunk you're interested in is the one piece that they're not interested in doing. And so they'd be happy to work together with you as long as you're not expecting them to pay for it.
Mm.
Okay. So those, you understand what I'm saying, Joan?
Right. So it might be that there's an organization that's doing something like tree planting through a specific city program. But if you come along and say, well, we want to do tree planting, they might say, well, great, because we've got all these faith communities that want to do tree planting. We don't have the expertise to help them. So could you work with them? And so you find a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah,
Um,
symbiotic. That's the right word. You
yeah.
find those connections.
Mhm.
And then they might say, and oh, by the way, we have the wheelbarrows and the shovels. All we need is this.
Right. And there's a grant that we can't apply for, but you guys could, or something. So,
Right.
and we'll send a letter of support to.
So for example, right here in our city said we're a very small little town, and they said we would like to get 14 trees planted, but we don't have time. All of our people are just busy dealing with the things that the city has to do, but we will pay for the 14 trees. We will even come out and dig the hole for you. What we really need is someone to go up and down the streets and ask people if they want a tree.
Wow.
And so that's what I did last weekend. We went, knocked on doors, trying to find 14 people who
Ah,
wanted to have a tree. Well, that took some time because a lot of people weren't home, they didn't answer the door, and it actually took 3 of us on different days for just 14 trees. But we did it. And so, but we didn't have to pay for the trees and we didn't have to order them. But I learned a lot about tree planting from doing that. But it
that,
also gives you,
I was just going to say that's such a neat thing because again, even from something that small, that group could go on to say, we partnered with the city and our neighbors and we
and
whatever,
we
you know,
learned, yeah, we
exactly.
learned lots of
And we had
things that were
in-kind
issues.
contributions and so even something pretty small, but you know, who of us have actually planted 14 trees in our communities? You know, it takes some effort.
It
Yeah.
takes a little bit of learning, etc., because it also gives you that aspect of being able to ask, I want to do this project. And they might say, oh, we tried that before and it didn't work. Well, that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity to say, oh, who tried that before? Can I go talk to them? And can you tell me why it didn't work? Tell me what I need to do different. And isn't it nice that you did a pilot? Because that's what pilots are all about, is
Right.
figuring out what works and what doesn't work. But it also tells you there's people out there that actually are interested in doing it. And what that question of what would you do differently? A
Yeah.
wise person once told me people that are successful think they know what they did right, but the people who failed know what they failed at. They know what went wrong. And
Right.
so asking
Yeah.
those questions is it can be fun. You just got to make it fun.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that we've kind of touched on, but one of the steps early on is this idea of identifying 10 exemplary models.
Yes.
And, you know, even if you're in I've been doing with some of our tree planting partners or challengers, asking, wow, Umar, you planted 6,000 tree seedlings. You gave them to students at the school. Where did you get them? And he said, we had one donor who gave them to us. And it's like, wow, that's interesting. It was a private individual that
Mm-hmm.
gave them the money for 6,000 tree seedlings. I asked Halima in Nigeria, also, she's a school teacher. She got a grant from Global Change Makers, and there is a group there in Nigeria. Um, One of the guys, I think it was Businje in Uganda, they got a grant from Rotary International. And, so with each person that you talk to, it's like, oh, Rotary, or
Yes.
oh, maybe there's an upstanding citizen, or maybe it's a soccer player, a football player that is kind of famous that wants to do some projects with youth. We have one of our guys he's in Korea, but he's also does stuff in Uganda, where he's from, Bigger Al Islam. He uses sports as a way to get kids together, and then once they're together, they do climate mitigation projects. So, wouldn't a famous athlete love to sponsor something like that? And so this idea that finding out who's already doing it, where are they getting the money, these are tips.
Yes.
And
Yes.
no one person can really do it for you, because it's, maybe someone in your community did something different. Maybe they built a homeless shelter, but you could ask them, how did you get the money for that? Who supported you? Maybe there's a sister city. You don't know, but when you ask those questions, how did you get your support? That gives you those tips for what might work for you.
Yes. And when you ask the question, you do want to be somewhat delicate in asking
Yeah.
that, because one is you want to kind of say it from the standpoint of, now that I've described to you my project, who of all of the because we know each other in the funding world. We don't know everybody, but we know like our neighbors, so to
Sure.
speak. And so we may not be able to fund your project, but we might know of some others that we could suggest. When you go to an organization and ask them who are their funders, part of what you're really asking them is, who are the people funding you that might also want to be funding us, or
Right.
how can we partner, or which are the organizations that could not fund you because you're not doing tree planting, so they would not fund you, but they're looking for tree planting, and that's what we're doing. Because they don't want it, there's that idea that there's only a little bit of money out there, and if I
Right.
tell you who's funding me, you're going to take away my funder. And
Yes.
that's one of those other things that they don't understand. Most foundations will fund, for example, 20 projects, not just one project, or maybe they fund 100 projects, or they can fund 5 projects that deal with environmental, and they can do 5 projects that's teaching job skills, and they can do 5 projects that deal with feeding the hungry. So asking them who are the organizations that might fund us as well as you might
Right.
go a little further.
That's a more delicate way to put it. I think what
Yes.
I've done in the past is more the research side, where you go to their website and they say, here's who funded us. And so you can see that, right? If that's public, then you don't have to have that specific conversation. But I do think there a lot of people, it's kind of like, if you the difference between asking someone for a job or asking them, hey, do you know anybody who you might refer me to that might be looking for somebody with my skills? People like to be that referrer
Yes.
and to make those introductions. And so that's a good idea as one of your outreach to say, not necessarily, will you support us, but do you know somebody who might be interested in this, that kind of keeps them off the spot.
And then be a good neighbor as well as you're going out there and finding funding that does not fit you. Keep your ears up for where you can refer that to. Because
Right.
now you told me about this group, so that makes me feel good to keep an eye out for you as well.
Right.
Let me cover two other things very
Yes.
quickly
Okay,
before I
great.
forget. One is that almost every foundation will have a deadline and a process for when you have to apply.
Right.
So for example, their deadline might be July 1st. You need to have your grant in, but you don't get the money or accept it, or they'll know until October, because they're meeting and going through that 1,000 grants of applying. Takes a while. So you need to be aware of that. If you're working on a project that you need the money during July and their deadline is July 1st, but you're not going to get the check till October, you need to know that. But keep that place in mind for the next year,
Right.
for that next project. All right, the next thing I want to mention is that every community, whether they're in the United States or somewhere else in the world, there are groups that do funding in your area. And you want to find out who those major groups are. That goes to what you were saying, Joan. Now, in the United States, virtually every single county has a United Way office. Every community has banks that are there. So if you go to the bank and tell them that you're a not-profit, and can the person in the bank that works with nonprofits talk to you? Many times when someone has died and in their will, they said, I want to put $2,000 from my will to be given for planting trees. The people at the bank sometimes, not always, but sometimes they know who that is. They themselves have it in their bank. But they will also know within your community who it is that handles that. So there might be a lawyer or a trustee within the county that handles that money. And now you can bring in here in Indiana, every single county in Indiana has a community foundation, and most places around the country have that. Virtually every country around the world has a United Way, not a Rotary group. And the Rotary groups are fantastic because they do two things. One, they do fundraising within their own organization for projects that are what they're working on. But the whole purpose of Rotary is to bring together business people who want to do community projects. So the Rotary might not be able to fund you, but they might be willing to let you come to one of their meetings and talk about what you're doing. Because now you're a speaker and they don't have to go find a speaker.
Right.
And in the meantime, like you said, maybe there's a football player sitting out there or someone else who's retired and says, I want to give them some money to get these trees planted or this community garden in. Or they will know who else within your community is trying to do it. The Rotary is very, very connected in the various communities. So United Way, Community Foundation, Rotary, and then asking all of them, who should you be talking to? And would they call and give you an introduction to get you in the door?
Right.
The larger your city, the larger the United Way and these other organizations are, so it's a little harder to get through the door necessarily to talk to them. But there will be somebody who will.
And yeah, and I think when you have that, that's when you go to, okay, I want to start a community garden. There's one down the street. that those people that have been there ahead of time might
Now,
be able to introduce you or kind of help you. Going to somebody smaller might have an introduction already.
right. Going back to the budget, part of doing that is because you're listing money, yes, but you're actually listing what are the things that you need. And before you spend any money on any of those, find out where within your community someone will provide you with those things. And I'm not saying that you need seeds, so you go to the local gardening store and ask them if they will give it to you, because they get everybody asking them for gardening things. What you want to do is have that list that you need gardening things, and people that are interested will do so.
Right.
The other thing in environmental items is your local extension office.
Mm-hmm.
Every county in the United States has a college or university that provides an extension office. It's the same people that will test your soil or tell you what
Right.
kind of bugs you have. And you would think the extension office would not be interested in teaching people how to grow food. Well, they are. They're very interested in those projects. So going and talking to them, not only do you find out what they're doing, and they will know who the groups are that are trying to do this with you, so you find more people to work with you. But it turns out they may have committees that they have formed around your project,
Great
and they
idea.
would like
Yeah.
to get you on that committee.
Right. Yeah. And I think this is the way it goes, is that, then you start talking to people in the committee and then they have other ideas. And, there's meetups. You can check for meetups. You can post on Nextdoor. And if you're in an area that doesn't have those specific things, then you have the community equivalent of whatever that is, talking with those community leaders and, figuring out how to align what you're saying with their mission, to get them interested and be able to refer you. And there's one other thing that I wanted to mention. I was interviewing Dan Diaz, in the Philippines. He's done so many amazing things with um, response after hurricanes, to getting people chargers and LED lights, and doing compassion stations during the COVID response, and entrepreneurial. Had the women there, got together and started making PPEs, and just amazing stuff, gardens, and on and on. But I was asking him, I said, some of our challengers are saying, well, I can't do anything because I don't have money. And he said, that should never be, the lack of money should never be an excuse not to do something for the environment. And
Yeah.
I think in particular with the environment, it might be in any areas that you work, but Mother Nature is so generous. We have some of our people in the Philippines who are learning, like Teza and Gio, who are learning how to grow indigenous trees from seeds. And I
That is
asked,
so important.
isn't it? And I asked, how are you doing it? And she said, we go out and collect seeds, and then we come back, and in our little yards, we're learning to grow seeds. And like Chris and Brenda that are teaching vertical gardens in the slums of Kampala, that nature is giving us, there's dirt, and there's probably a way you can collect those seeds. And in Kampala, they're using the found trash, the plastic containers, to make their planting containers. So
Yeah.
I think kind of remembering that nature has this abundance, that we can start with that, and then getting money for the next, that next bigger thing that you talked about.
Yeah. The money is at the point where you're needing to scale up.
Mm-hmm.
What you said earlier, Joan, is several times, is use my own terms, don't reinvent the wheel. Everyone has tried this before. And one of the things I learned this year with our own tree planting aspect is that starting a tree from seed is something that is very much needed. And it turns out, I learned, that again, almost every county in the country has a group through some organization, whether it's the Department of Natural Resources or your extension office, that collects seeds. So one, they need the seeds collected, but two, they've already been doing it. They have volunteers that are working on it. They never have enough. Some organizations, like here, we have black walnut trees, and our food pantry has people go out and collect the seeds, bring them to the food pantry, and then they sell the seeds to another organization. So that's a fundraiser for them. But if you connect with those groups, when you say who's already doing something close, that's when you find out, oh, it turns out this other group is also paying people to grow the seeds.
That's exactly what Tessa said, was that they were getting paid from the Forestry Service to grow the seeds.
So every county in the United States has something similar to that. What you might find out in your county is they'll say, no, we don't need anyone else to go and collect seeds. We've got lots of it. We got it covered. What we really need is this step. There's steps along the way.
So then you can, and that's kind of that thing where I say, find your 100 ideal partners, because you're going to either find, wow, somebody's doing it, we just join them. Or as you said, there's a little missing spot where somebody's got all these pieces before and all the pieces after. And if we plug in there, they're going to be happy and supporting us and able to help us make an impact. Great.
When you're talking to people, if you have this little bird that keeps bugging you in the back of your mind, ask that question. Bring it up, whatever it is. Because for whatever reason I have found in life, that's the most important thing for that discussion.
That's true. No matter, what your spiritual interpretation is of that little voice, it does tend to be something that needs to be brought up. And that's a big part of it, is that a lot of us aren't used to this thing of just calling random people up and talking about all these things. But one of the things I used to do when I was in Longmont, I had Wednesdays off from my job, and I just always set meetings on Wednesdays. So if somebody said, well, yeah, we should talk about it, I say, how about Wednesday? And I just always filled up my Wednesdays and made those connections. So finding a way that you actually get out there, talk to people, and then they'll refer you to the next and the next, and you'll be able to weave that web of support. Some of it will be in kind, some of it will be cheerleaders, some will be volunteers, and some of it will be money.
Right. So Joan, if I can jump into a slightly different direction. Yeah. We've talked about, okay, you sat down and you played with your budget. You sat down and you wrote down every which way of thinking about it, so that if someone wanted to pay for an entire tree, or if someone wanted to pay for just the tools, now that you've gathered all your information you want to answer the 5 questions. Who's doing it? What are you doing? Not solving poverty, but what are you actually doing? What are you spending that money on? So who, what, when are you going to do it? This year, this fall? Where are you doing it? The location. Now, that doesn't mean we're doing it at 652 State Street. They're saying, are you doing it in Denver, Colorado? You're doing it in Uganda?
Yeah.
Where? And so who, what, where, when, and why. Keep the why short. You do not need to send 20 pages describing the problem. If an organization needs 20 pages to understand the problem, then they're not going to fund you because they don't understand you anyway. I was always told if you cannot answer those questions in 3 lines, basically 3 sentences, then you don't know what you're doing.
Wow.
You want to keep it short. That initial introduction
I love
needs
that.
to
So
be
you could
short.
say, we are going to start 10 community gardens in our town or our neighborhood in the next year, because we want to provide outdoor nature activities for kids during COVID.
Right.
Maybe that, I'm not sure. It seems like that might have, and we need whatever it is, $1,000 to do that.
So what I suggest
that's
is
neat.
take a piece of paper, write who, what, where, when, why, how, and after each of them in only 3 words. Answer each of those with just 3 words, and then put it together in your sentence structure.
Snazzy. I like it.
Okay, then pay attention. Some of these grants will even say, when you write these 3 sentences, or when you write, that you have to use a particular font and a particular size. What is that all about? What that is telling you is that they are getting thousands of grants, and it takes so much time that they're going to go hire a college student to go through and not even read your grant. And people say, what? They didn't even read my grant? Surely they've given me the money. No, they did not read it. They're hiring a college student to say, wrong font, canceled, wrong font, so they can get the pile down to 1 stack of about 100. One gentleman who actually reviews grants said, imagine coming in and you have an entire classroom filled with Xerox boxes, floor to ceiling, with grant requests. And you have to get through all of them, an entire classroom. They just hire students to go through and say, wrong font, wrong size. We said 3 sentences in this much space, and you took this.
Right.
Reject, reject. They didn't even read it. So,
well, and I
short 3
think that
sentences.
goes back to the relationship. They want somebody who respects the process. And if you can't respect the process enough to use the right font or follow those directions, then you're not going to be somebody fun to work with.
Right.
Yeah.
Do not put tons of fluff. This is not a high school assignment where you get a higher grade for having 10,000 words instead of 2,000 words. Forget the fluff, but answer the question. Be concise. If you really feel that it takes more information, or you already had it written up, put it in an attachment. That way, if they feel they need more information, they can go read the attachment. So answer the question. Don't say, go read the 60-page attachment. Answer the question, but say more information is available as an attachment.
Yeah.
If you have a website, definitely give them your web link. And please do not forget to give your name and phone number. You would think that's silly, but you'd be surprised how many come in and they forgot their name, their phone number, and how to get a hold of them.
Right. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and also I think being judicious, I saw one of your notes in there was like, test the web links. So, you might have made an error on your email address. So if you also have your phone number, it just gives those extra layers of resilience.
Yes. And don't be afraid to call the organization ahead of time and ask them your questions. Be respectful if it says we do not take unsolicited. That means that if you really want that organization, you have to find a person. They usually list their board. Find a person who knows a person. Like the United Way might know that they are a good fit. So you can ask the United Way, would you let them know about us? Because it says here, only if we are asked can we get in. Again, that's because they're getting thousands of requests.
Right.
But don't be afraid to see if you can find out who can talk to you.
Mm-hmm. And the last other thing I wanted to say was a friend of mine, they started this Citizens Alliance for Sustainable Inglewood. She helped get a couple bills passed the year before last. And she said, what I figured out was the more people you tell what you want, the more likely you are to get what you want. And I thought that was just like such a beautiful thing. And it's that same thing. It may not be the right person, but when they know it, they might refer you to somebody else and that person and that person. But if you're not out there expressing what your vision, then it's pretty unlikely it's going to come to fruition.
And I'll give all of your people one additional idea, and that is sit down and write just a 1-page. If I liked your exercise, Joan, where you said if I had this amount of money, now double it, now double it.
Mm-hmm.
On 1 page, answer that who, what, where, when, how. Ask, leave a blank or whatever for what it is that you're going to ask for, why you need it, get it all the way down in 1 page, and I call it a hip pocket grant.
Right.
You always want to have a hip pocket grant ready, so when you meet somebody and they say to you, right now, if you had $1,000, what we do, and you say, oh, here it is, I got it all ready for you. Because right then they're thinking of it. That person who is usually a donor individual, they're thinking of it right now. And if you're able to send that to them in less than 24 hours, you have a good shot at getting that money. But if you've got to go back and go through this whole process we just talked about,
your board and blah, blah, blah. Right.
Their brain has gone on to something else.
Yeah.
You always want to have that ready. Now, if you get that $1,000, sit down and write the next one so that you always have it ready.
Right.
And that's why I said what you really want is on your computer. You've written it all up and you can just fill in the blank.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great
pocket
tip.
grant.
I like it. That's a good one. All right. So how are we doing? Did we hit the key points?
I think we did. I don't recall that we missed anything. I think you have more information than you might have to create 2 classes out of this.
Well, this is really great. I think, it's just such a mystery for so many people who haven't spent the amount of time that you have thinking, reading grants and working with people on all sides of this, that it's probably like for others who somebody'd say, go plant a tree. It's like, wait, where do I even start? So having this kind of inside view of what funders wished you knew is super helpful. So thanks so much for hanging out with us, Pam, and thank you everybody who is participating in the challenge, that you are taking actions to convert your passion into reality. And we're so excited to be seeing all the amazing things you're doing. And thank you again, Pam, for sharing your ideas.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Great. That sounds great. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.